At 9:30 in the morning on Sunday, March 8, 1940, the offices of the British Air Ministry in London, England, were unusually quiet. Across Europe, the war had been raging for 6 months. German forces had already crushed Poland. Intelligence reports suggested that France and the Low Countries could fall next. The Royal Air Force was expanding rapidly, but its aircraft factories were facing a serious limitation: aluminum. Every bomber, every fighter, every transport aircraft depended on it, and Britain did not have enough. Inside a meeting room at Hatfield Aerodrome, headquarters of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, one engineer believed the problem could be solved in a way that sounded almost absurd. The engineer was Geoffrey de Havilland, founder and chief designer of the company. His proposal did not involve more aluminum. It involved wood. Specifically, layers of spruce, birch plywood, and balsa wood bonded together with advanced adhesives and molded into aerodynamic shapes. To many officials inside the Air Ministry, the idea sounded like a step backward. Wooden aircraft had largely disappeared from military aviation during the 1930s as metal construction became standard. Yet Geoffrey de Havilland believed wood offered something metal could not: speed. His concept called for a twin-engine aircraft with no defensive gun turrets, powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. Without heavy gun positions and their crews, the aircraft would be dramatically lighter. Less weight meant greater speed. The aircraft would outrun enemy fighters rather than fight them. That idea contradicted nearly every bomber doctrine in the Royal Air Force at the time. Bombers were expected to defend themselves with multiple gun positions. Removing those guns seemed reckless. But Geoffrey de Havilland understood something about engineering that many strategists overlooked. Every gun turret added weight. Every gun turret increased drag, and drag slowed aircraft down. If the turrets disappeared, the aircraft could carry the same engines as frontline fighters, yet weigh far less. During early design calculations in late 1939, engineers at de Havilland estimated that the aircraft could reach speeds greater than 380 miles per hour. That was faster than most operational fighters in Europe. Inside the Air Ministry, the proposal was met with skepticism. Officials questioned whether a wooden aircraft could survive combat conditions. They doubted the durability of wood at high speeds and high altitudes. There was also a deeper concern. British aircraft production depended heavily on metalworking factories. A wooden aircraft would require a completely different supply chain: furniture makers, piano manufacturers, cabinet workshops, companies that had never built aircraft components. Yet that unusual supply chain became one of the design's strongest strategic advantages. If the aircraft used wood, it would not compete with bomber factories for aluminum. Instead, Britain could mobilize thousands of civilian woodworking shops across the country. Chair builders in High Wycombe, piano manufacturers in London, furniture factories scattered across southern England. They could all produce parts for the aircraft. By September 19, 1940, the Air Ministry finally approved a prototype under the designation DH-98. The timing was critical. The Battle of Britain was underway. German bombers were striking British cities daily. The Royal Air Force urgently needed aircraft that could penetrate German defenses later in the war. Construction began at Salisbury Hall, a country estate converted into a secret design and assembly site. Engineers developed an unusual manufacturing method. Each half of the aircraft fuselage was built inside large concrete molds. Layers of plywood and balsa wood were glued together to form a lightweight sandwich structure. The result was surprisingly strong. 2 halves were then bonded together, forming a smooth aerodynamic body with almost no external rivets. Without rivets, there was less drag. Less drag meant more speed. Even the wings were built using laminated wood structures around internal spars. By November 25, 1940, the prototype aircraft rolled onto the runway at Hatfield Aerodrome. At the controls sat Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the son of the aircraft designer and chief test pilot for the company. At 1:45 in the afternoon, the engines started. 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin 21 engines, each producing more than 1,400 horsepower, roared to life. Observers expected a cautious test flight. Instead, the aircraft accelerated rapidly down the runway and lifted into the cold autumn air with unexpected smoothness. Within minutes, it became clear that the wooden aircraft was something extraordinary. Test instruments showed speeds exceeding 390 miles per hour, faster than many operational fighters. But speed alone did not guarantee survival. The aircraft still had to prove it could operate over enemy territory, penetrate air defenses, and return safely. And that challenge would begin soon, because within 2 years, this wooden aircraft would fly deep into the heart of Nazi Germany, where radar stations, fighter squadrons, and anti-aircraft guns waited across the continent. The question facing British commanders was no longer whether the aircraft could fly. The real question was whether this wooden machine could survive the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. At 10:15 in the morning on Saturday, May 15, 1942, the briefing room at Royal Air Force Station Swanton Morley in Norfolk, England, was filled with the quiet rustle of maps unfolding across wooden tables. The officers gathered there belonged to No. 105 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. Their aircraft were unlike any other bombers in the war. Each crew consisted of only 2 men, a pilot and a navigator. Their aircraft carried no defensive gun turrets, no tail gunner, no dorsal gunner, nothing except speed. The aircraft was the de Havilland Mosquito B Mark IV, powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin 21 engines. Each engine produced roughly 1,460 horsepower. The aircraft could reach speeds above 380 miles per hour while carrying a 4,000-pound bomb load. For comparison, many German fighters operating over Western Europe at the time, including the Messerschmitt Bf-109F, struggled to exceed similar speeds once they climbed to interception altitude. That difference mattered. German air defense relied on a layered system. Early warning radar stations detected incoming aircraft. Fighter controllers then directed interceptors to predicted positions. Heavy anti-aircraft guns surrounded major industrial cities. Most bombers flying over Germany moved slowly in large formations. That allowed German radar operators time to track them. The Mosquito did the opposite. It traveled alone, and it traveled fast. On this morning in May, the operational objective was a precision daylight strike against the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Norway. The building housed records of the German security police, including files on Norwegian resistance networks. Destroying those records could disrupt German intelligence operations across Scandinavia. But the mission required extreme precision. The target sat inside a dense urban area. Bombs had to hit the building directly. At 10:42 in the morning, 4 Mosquito bombers began their takeoff roll from the runway at Swanton Morley. Each aircraft carried 4 500-pound bombs. The formation climbed over the North Sea before turning northeast toward Norway. Their route was carefully planned. Flying low reduced the chance of radar detection. But low-altitude flight also exposed the aircraft to small-caliber anti-aircraft guns once they approached the target. The crews relied on speed and surprise. At 12:25 in the afternoon, the 4 Mosquito aircraft crossed the Norwegian coastline at less than 100 feet above the water. German coastal radar stations struggled to detect aircraft flying that low. The Mosquito crews followed valleys and fjords, using terrain to remain hidden from observation. By the time German radar operators realized aircraft were approaching Oslo, the Mosquito bombers were already closing on the city. Inside German fighter command centers, controllers scrambled interceptors from nearby airfields, but the Mosquito aircraft were moving too quickly. At 12:43 in the afternoon, the first Mosquito bomber reached Oslo. The navigator identified the Gestapo building through the bombardier window in the nose of the aircraft. The pilot climbed slightly to line up the attack run. 4 bombs fell in quick succession. Moments later, the second and third aircraft released their payloads. Explosions tore through the building complex. German anti-aircraft guns began firing from rooftops and nearby positions. But the Mosquito aircraft were already turning away. Within seconds, they accelerated toward the coast at full power. German fighter pilots racing toward Oslo soon discovered a frustrating reality. The Mosquito bombers had already disappeared. Their speed made interception extremely difficult, and this mission demonstrated something that British planners had hoped from the beginning. A fast bomber did not need heavy defensive guns. It needed precision, it needed surprise, and most importantly, it needed speed. By late 1942, the Mosquito was performing multiple roles across Europe. Some versions carried 420mm Hispano cannons and 4 machine guns, making them formidable night fighters. Others flew photo reconnaissance missions, operating at altitudes above 30,000 feet while photographing German industrial targets. Pathfinder versions of the aircraft guided large bomber formations by marking targets with flares. Each role depended on the same core advantage: speed. German fighter squadrons quickly learned that intercepting Mosquito aircraft required perfect timing and ideal positioning. Even the advanced Focke-Wulf FW-190A struggled to catch them in level flight. But the Mosquito success also introduced a new problem for German air defense planners. The aircraft could strike almost anywhere across occupied Europe: rail yards, command headquarters, radar stations, factories, and sometimes targets that were far more sensitive, strategic targets that required absolute precision. By early 1944, British commanders were preparing to use the Mosquito in a role that carried enormous political risk. A mission against the heart of the German security system itself. A mission that would require flying directly into one of the most heavily defended cities in occupied Europe. The target stood in the center of Copenhagen, Denmark, and the success of the operation would depend entirely on the speed and precision of wooden aircraft that many officials once believed would fail. But if the crews miscalculated their approach by even a few seconds, the consequences would extend far beyond the battlefield. At 11:20 in the morning on Wednesday, March 21, 1945, 4 squadrons of Royal Air Force Mosquito fighter bombers crossed the North Sea at low altitude. Their destination was Copenhagen, Denmark. The target was a large office complex known as the Shell Building, used by the German Gestapo command in Denmark. Inside the building were records, interrogation offices, and operational files connected to resistance movements across the country. By early 1945, the Danish resistance had become a serious problem for German authorities. Underground networks were sabotaging rail lines, gathering intelligence, and helping Allied agents move through occupied territory. The Gestapo headquarters stored detailed files on these resistance members. If those files remained intact, dozens of resistance fighters could be arrested within weeks. The Royal Air Force planned a precision strike, but the challenge was extreme. The building stood in the center of a crowded city. Bombing from high altitude risked destroying surrounding neighborhoods. Instead, the Mosquito crews would attack at very low altitude, dropping bombs directly into the building. The operation involved aircraft from No. 140 Squadron, No. 21 Squadron, No. 487 Squadron of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and No. 454 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force. In total, 20 Mosquito aircraft would conduct the strike. Each bomber carried two 500-pound bombs fitted with delayed action fuses. The delay allowed the aircraft time to escape the blast radius after releasing the bombs. German air defenses in Copenhagen included multiple anti-aircraft gun batteries, rooftop machine guns, and nearby fighter units that could be scrambled within minutes. The plan relied on two advantages the Mosquito had proven again and again: speed and accuracy. At 12:34 in the afternoon, the first wave approached Copenhagen at rooftop height. Flying low created a new problem. At high speed, city buildings appeared suddenly in the cockpit window. Pilots had only seconds to adjust their flight path. As the lead aircraft approached the city center, smokestacks, church towers, and office buildings rushed past on both sides. The shell building appeared directly ahead. The pilot pulled slightly upward to clear nearby rooftops. The navigator released the bombs. Two explosions tore through the upper floors of the building. Moments later, additional Mosquito aircraft arrived over the target. Bombs struck the central structure, collapsing floors and igniting fires inside the Gestapo headquarters. German anti-aircraft gunners opened fire from multiple positions across the city, but the Mosquito aircraft were already accelerating away. The entire strike lasted only a few minutes. The speed of the aircraft gave German defenses almost no time to react. Inside the ruined building, large portions of Gestapo intelligence files were destroyed. For Danish resistance networks, the attack had immediate consequences. Many names scheduled for arrest disappeared in the fires. Resistance leaders later confirmed that the destruction of those records saved numerous members from capture. From a strategic perspective, the mission demonstrated the unique value of the Mosquito aircraft. No conventional bomber could have performed the same operation. Large bomber formations required altitude and long approach paths. They could not deliver precise attacks inside dense cities without heavy collateral damage. The Mosquito solved that problem. Its speed allowed small groups of aircraft to strike critical targets with minimal warning. And its wooden structure, once dismissed as outdated, had become one of the most effective aircraft designs of the entire war. By the end of 1945, more than 7,700 Mosquito aircraft had been built. They served in nearly every major air role. Night fighters hunted German bombers over Britain. Pathfinder aircraft guided bomber streams toward targets deep inside Germany. Photo reconnaissance variants flew thousands of miles over enemy territory without escort, photographing factories, airfields, and troop movements. Some Mosquito aircraft even carried the massive 4,000-pound high-capacity bomb, nicknamed the Cookie, striking heavily defended industrial targets. Their speed remained their greatest protection. In many situations, German fighters simply could not catch them, and that speed came from a design choice made years earlier inside a quiet office at Hatfield. Wood instead of metal. A lighter structure, less drag, more speed. Geoffrey de Havilland had believed that a fast aircraft could outrun danger instead of fighting it. Combat experience across Europe proved that idea correct. The Mosquito became one of the most versatile aircraft of the Second World War. It flew bombing missions, night interceptions, reconnaissance operations, and precision strikes against critical targets across the continent. And it did all of this while built largely from spruce, plywood, and balsa wood. An aircraft that many officials once doubted had become one of the most successful designs of the entire conflict. A wooden aircraft that turned speed into survival.